Hey everybody, welcome back to Men Need to Be Heard, the show where we have open, honest discussions on the issues that men and boys face in today's society. And today's guest is someone I've been following for quite some time now, and I'm really looking forward to having a chat with him about a wide variety of topics and issues that men face. And among other things, he's a research scientist, a writer, a fellow strength and conditioning coach, and he's also one of those rare voices that is out there actually telling it like it is and standing up for men. Please join me in welcoming Dr. James Nuzzo to the show. Hi, James.
Hi there. How you doing?
I am fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing very good. Looking forward to the chat today.
Let's get started by asking you to just tell us a little bit about yourself, whatever you care to share.
Okay, I'm currently located in Perth, Western Australia, but I'm a dual citizen of the US and Australia. I was born and raised in Pennsylvania and lived in North Carolina and Florida for a couple years each. And then I came over to Australia to do a PhD in exercise physiology in Sydney and then eventually moved to Perth. So I currently do a mix of research on exercise science and men's health and sex differences. And most of that stuff I post either on Twitter or at my Substack page, which is the Nuzzo letter, and it's very evidence-based. I publish new and interesting, what I think are interesting graphs about men's health every week.
Yeah, James, I have to say, I've as I said earlier, I followed you for quite a while, and the information that you share, I use all the time. You know, I do my own research, but the quality of yours, and you've helped me to be able to, go into different areas that maybe I wasn't so much of an expert on, and I appreciate that. And I encourage people to go and follow you either on Substack and Twitter, and you got a webpage and all that. We'll get into that. So, but let me start off by saying thank you for doing all that, because you make my life easier. I got to be honest with you as a content creator. So know that you do that. Let's
awesome. That's great. That's great. That's great news. I'm glad that, I do put in a little bit of effort into extracting and finding those data and graphing them. So I'm glad people are finding uses for them.
Some of the data you pull, I'm like, where did he get it from? And then of course you document where you did, and then I start going reading some of that stuff, and then I just shake my head half the time, because you cover a lot of stuff like governments will do, and we'll get into that, but it's mind blowing, isn't it?
It is, and it's a bit painful to have to read through those documents and then see what you see on the graphs. It's not the most comfortable thing, but someone's got to put it out there.
Well, now that you mention that, let me talk with you a bit about that, because it's something I struggle with as well, right? You start doing some research. If I'm going to do a video on a particular topic, I start researching it, and emotionally it does affect me. Sometimes it's anger. Sometimes it's sadness. I would venture to say most of the time it is for me. What's that like for you? I mean, you kind of alluded to it, but like if you're reading on whatever topic and it hits home with you, how does that make you like feel emotionally? Because for me, it can be draining.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's a bit of frustration and anger because some of the stuff out there is so biased and non-objective that it's hard to know how to move forward. So you're not even sure whether the graph you're about to make is really going to have any impact, particularly on the people whose information you're kind of reading sometimes, like some of the journalists at The Guardian, for example. It's like this is never going to change their mind because they're layered with so many problematic ideas. But thankfully, today, I've learned that you're appreciating the graph, so I'll keep on it. But receiving feedback, like from people yourself, does help. It helps balance out that frustration that you come across along the way.
Yeah, it's interesting because I go through similar experiences, and while I hope it's going to resonate with, let's say, politicians or the media. I often wonder if they even registers with them. I think in some cases it has, and you take those little wins when you get them, But for me, at least, it's the guys that follow me that give me the feedback that drive me to do what I do. And as I said, I appreciate you doing what you do because you make it much easier for me to be able to do what I do. I'm piggybacking off of you, and I want to make sure you get the credit for that. It's interesting to see. I want to ask you one other question. So I'm going off track already, but that's what I do. As an academic, because you have a doctorate, so obviously you're in academia. What's it like for you with regard to that? Because I've talked with others in academia who speak on men's issues or highlight various issues. They get a lot of blowback. Do you experience that at all?
I have, and actually, technically, at the moment, I'm not in academia.
Okay.
And but part of the reason for that, it's not the full reason, but part of it is because of some of the stuff that I've published with regard to men's health and sex differences. So, yeah, at the last university that I was at, there were certain people that were not particular fans of some of the things that I was saying on social media and publishing, even though they're going through peer-reviewed academic journals. So yeah, it does come with can come with some blowback, and I think that's why a lot of people decide to just close their mouth and not say anything. That's not my preference, my way to go. I would rather just be open and honest and let the cards fall where they may. But yeah, there's always that potential for blowback, but you just got to keep pushing forward, I think.
Yeah, I find that truly sad because there are some great minds in the academic space who do see what you and I see, and they do remain silent, mostly out of fear, and legitimate fear. I'm not trying to say that imply anything negative to that, but it speaks to just how tough it is right now, I think, in general, for any of us who are speaking out on men's issues, but really for men, right? Because it causes us to bottle up as men, because if we share, that we're angry or sad or whatever, we're going to face the blowback. We'll be mocked, ridiculed, all those things. And, I think I'm a little bit older than you. Well, I know I am, but over my lifetime, I've seen that get worse and worse. And I think most men these days are feeling like, I don't know who I am anymore. I'm a man, but that makes me toxic or something's wrong with me. And, that affects everyone, but from women to society, but also more specifically, it affects men mentally, emotionally, physically. Are you seeing that as well? I know the research that you're doing, it must bear it out a little bit. Can you share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, and even just acquaintances or colleagues that I have, I know that a lot of men who are coming out after their PhD are struggling to find positions in academia. And we know that these hiring preferences exist right now to get more women into academia. So there are a lot of guys who are finishing after the studies and looking around and being like, "What was all that?" And so they're actually walking away. A lot of them from academia. They're feeling like it is way too feminized and that their contributions are not appreciated. They're sick of hearing the male privilege narratives, and they're sick of all the handouts going to the women. And oh my gosh, every single newsletter email that comes out from the university has some sort of gender equity initiative in it, layered on top of additional DEI stuff. And a lot of guys have just said, look, this is just too much. So I think universities are going to experience a bit of a brain drain, actually, and the talent is going to go into industry or other areas, and then probably there's not going to be as many students that want to go there.
That's an interesting thing. It's, I don't know about Australia, but in the States now, enrollment all the way through graduation in college and university is basically 60% female, 40% male. I'm rounding the numbers, but it's in there. And those numbers are trending to go even wider. I saw a study not too long ago where they're saying it's more like 70-30 now because they're counting boys who go into college but then drop out as attending college. And if you extrapolate that out, well, then the numbers are even wider because they didn't graduate. It's scary because it also, like you said, it leads to a brain drain. But it also, I think, to go to what you were just talking about, if there's no men in university and it becomes so female centric, it takes away positive male role models. And we're already seeing on the family side, fathers have been driven out of the families. Again, the numbers are different for each country, but now you don't even have men teaching in kindergarten all the way through 12, K through 12, but then you're seeing the same in college. I think that's having a serious effect on men. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree. And, one of the interesting things is those who advocate for having more women in certain areas like STEM do not, at the same time, advocate for more men studying, let's say, primary or elementary education at the universities. So it's a completely biased conversation where we're only looking to help one sex. And then, like you said, when you start to look around, you're like, oh, wow, well, there's not many guys in any field anymore, at any level. And that's the direction that we're heading in. And I think we're actually in the middle of a big social experiment. I don't think we've really ever been here before. Not, I mean, there's always been more, female elementary school educators, but in terms of the universities, the sex demographic is changing, and it's at the student level, it's at the professor level, and it's also at the admin staff level. And that's where I have this term, the feminization of the universities. It's happening at every single level, and they're becoming very bureaucratic as well. So, like yourself, I'm concerned about boys and men's education the whole way. And then, of course, if a boy doesn't make it through high school, then of course he's never going to go on to college in most cases. So yeah, I don't think it's looking particularly good. And unfortunately, you try to have a conversation about it within the academic community, and they just continue to have gamma bias and just continually just focus on increasing the number of females.
Yeah, I'm laughing because you try and have a conversation with them, you might as well talk to a wall. They will not even allow for the discussion, let alone have it. It's amazing to me, and it leads me to really worry about the future because so many of the younger guys, 18 to 25 in particular right now, I think, but really widening it out 18 to 35, they're feeling isolated, disconnected. They're, as you mentioned earlier, tired of being just blamed for everything. It's not healthy for men, but it's not healthy for society either because they're walking away from society, and men do the dirty jobs. I mean, not to be sexist, but women, they can do them. Never said they can't do them. They won't do them. They're not going to dig the ditches. They're not going to, pick up the garbage and all that. Yeah, occasionally one or two might, but I was watching not too long ago, they're laying internet lines on my street. It was 100% a male crew. And some of that you do need a college education for. Some of it you don't. But
Yeah.
if that walks away and the boys start getting more disconnected and basically hiding in their houses, how does that help anyone? What do you-
Yeah, I don't really see that it does. And of course, all the while they're laying the lines in the track, we have to listen to the academics talk about the notion of male privilege and stuff like that. And it's like, how is that a privileged position by any means? And so really what we're, I guess, getting at fundamentally is just a disconnect with objective reality. And I think once you get disconnected from what the reality is, then yeah, you're going to run into problems in the future if you don't actually recognize what the reality of the situation is.
Yeah, AI is not going to replace men on some of those dirty jobs. AI, I don't see AI climbing the poles to run electrical line in the middle of a hurricane. Who knows?
I'll just throw one kind of little random example here where if we spent, and we might talk about this later, but if we actually talked more about men's health and funding it and stuff like that, one of the leading causes of occupational death for men is transportation accidents. So like a truck driver gets in an accident and dies. If Now, this is not my specialty. I'm not super into this stuff, but I know some people are. But if you get into self-driving vehicles and stuff like that, you could significantly reduce potentially the number of male occupational deaths. Now, it's possible those deaths may get somehow transferred over to another area or something like that. But because we don't talk about men's health as a thing like we do women's health, we then don't even come around to having these kind of unique conversations. We're like, okay, here's a problem, male occupational death, and the leading cause is transportation accidents. Could we develop a technology or something else that might resolve that? But we don't ever get to the point of having that type of conversation.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sad part, right? Is we can't have that conversation. If we can have the conversation and maybe we find that the current paradigm is appropriate. I don't think so, but I'm just saying hypothetically, at least we've had the conversation, and I think it makes men feel like, all right, at least they're listening to us, as opposed to what we're dealing with now, which is they don't listen at all, they don't care. That's how men feel, and they're not wrong. I mean, I talk to politicians all the time. Some of them are just clueless, to be honest. Some of them are so radicalized themselves they can't see the forest through the trees. And when you talk to them about things like occupational deaths and how high it is for men and all of that stuff, they just deny. They can't even fathom it. It's sad, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that I publish a lot about the men's health versus women's health funding from the US government and the NIH. And they just continue to put out things that are not in alignment with objective reality. They're just not evidence-based claims. And the consequence of that, if we are working on the assumption that funding into an area does help that area, then by them continuing to make these false claims, it's hurting men's health.
Which ultimately, I think, also hurts women, right? They so want to split us off into separate, boxes. They don't realize that we are human beings. We're not things, right? So we do have to interact. We have to interconnect. And when they drive that division, which they've done for my entire lifetime, 50, 60 years now, we're seeing, specifically, you think about psychological things. Women, I was just reading, at every level are far more depressed than men. And that's not to say, I'm not saying that as a gotcha or anything like that. I find it truly tragic. And I have to believe that some of that is how they've portrayed things created the division and men walking away as a result, and thus, because women are far more social than men are. Men can be okay on their own. It's not great, but they can survive it. I don't think women can as much. There's differences, and I want to dive into some of the differences between men and women, but there's differences in the way we react to that, and I think you're seeing it blow back on the women as much, potentially even more than the men.
Yeah, look, I think men and women have evolved to be together for the sake of the
Without
species.
Question, right?
This is why this is so problematic and so dangerous, and why we kind of, like you say, put the men over here and the women over here. No. We it's a reciprocal sort of situation. One thing I just want to comment on is because the epidemiological data are so strong and apparent and can no longer be denied regarding the life expectancy difference and everything like that, I think there will be, and I think there is some attention coming now to men's health and different groups popping up. But keep an eye out for how it is framed. So I call this the gynocentrism versus the gynocentric versus the androcentric approach to men's health. And what I am afraid of is people coming out with the gynocentric approach to men's health. And what I mean by that is them advocating for men's health only to the extent that that has a positive impact on women. Mm-hmm. Now, as you said, helping men will naturally help everyone that man interacts with, including women. But this is a sort of fundamental difference. The goal, in my opinion, ought to be to help men for their own sake, and then whatever comes after that comes after that. But the danger here is only wanting to help men in sort of certain areas in which the benefit for women can be like clearly demonstrated. And I am starting to see some of that where it gets a bit confusing. It looks like the initiative or program they developed is for boys and men, but when you look at it, you realize, oh, it's actually a feminist-led initiative that's designed to help women, and they're just sort of using men to help women.
Yeah, I think you see that show up in like cancer research occasionally and stuff like that. It's an interesting point you make, because I do agree with you. I think there is more attention being paid to men's health. We're seeing it in the States right now with, the former president being diagnosed with prostate cancer. And I'm no fan of the media. People know that. But to their credit, it has raised discussion about prostate cancer and how it affects men and stuff like that. But as you said, there's always that undertone on there. They don't want to step out of that zero-sum game, as I like to call it, where it always has to be about women in some way. Now, prostate cancer is a male disease. They just can't quite get over the hump on it. They always have to come back in some way. Well, yeah, prostate cancer is serious, but let's not forget about breast cancer, say, something like that. And again, we are a species of two different genders. That's a whole argument right there. But the fact of the matter is, biologically speaking, we have a lot in common as well. And so to your point, if we help men, ultimately we can help women. But when we frame it differently, then I think it shuns us from focusing on the men. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think, if men know that you're legitimately interested in helping them, kind of full stop or period, then they would be more likely to be on board with that than if they were just getting that sense that, I'm not sure if these people really do care about me, or they just want to kind of use me to help someone else. So I'm hoping more for the androcentric approach to men's health, kind of moving forward.
Let's switch over to just a little difference from that. So, because one of the things that I often enjoy about your work is you share a lot of data and have discussions on the differences between men and women, physical, physiological, psychological. And I've done this well, not to the extent you do, and I know I've caught a lot of hate for it, as I'm sure you have. But just in general, because we've kind of been touching on it, why do you think it is so controversial to say that men and women have differences? It's mind-blowing to me as a society that it is so controversial. Why? What's the benefit? I don't see one.
I don't know, and I think we need to do a better job of communicating that it's not controversial, it's not demonizing one sex or the other. And they've done some experimental psychology work on this. I think this work was maybe done by Steve Stewart Williams, who has a really good Substack page where he talks about sex differences a lot. And so they'll present the research participants with different kind of case scenarios, and then sort of ask them how they feel about it. And they'll switch, the genders of the people involved in the scenarios. And I believe it is women tend to have a stronger reaction to like write-ups that show that women kind of came out below on some metric or something like that. So there is a legit measurable response that you're referring to. It's not made up. It's been measured in psychological studies. And I think we just need to teach people to not be like, yeah, like you said, what is the problem? Why are you so afraid of this? And part of it comes to acknowledging the unique contributions that men make. So if we have a study or something that shows that boys are physically stronger than girls, or men are, or they run faster, or something like that, or we show that there's a unique aspect of parenting that fathers bring to the table that women are less likely to bring to the table, that involves acknowledging unique contributions to society that are unique to males. And that is what we're really struggling with right now, because you have that ongoing narrative of male privilege and toxic masculinity. So, yeah, all these things are kind of layered on top of each other, and we're trying to, I guess, work our way through it. I do not understand why some people are so threatened by the sex difference stuff. I think they think it leads to stereotyping, and then opportunities for women are more limited because of the stereotyping, and your research just reinforces the stereotype. It's stuff like that, but it just goes on and on.
Well, I mean, a classic example that I look at is, this whole debate over women in men's sports and transgenderism and all that. Forget the politics of it. Let's just look at it from a biological perspective, which is, if you grow up male, you can start taking hormones at 15, 16. Yes, that will bring about change. But the bottom line is, you've spent the majority of your early life growing up as a male, which means you're going to naturally be stronger. I mean, I don't want to get too far into the weeds on science. Your tendons and muscles, your musculature are all going to remain the same as far as, you can change your hormones, but your biological structure is still there. And yet, when you try and have even that conversation with them, and I'm keeping it as loosely as I can, they go nuts. And I'm like, there's a reason why we need to separate men and women as far as sports. Some sports, no. Billiards, for example, right? I mean, some would argue against that, but when I played football, we had a woman on our team. She was amazing. As good as I've ever seen a woman could possibly be. And she was playing linebacker, and I was on the offensive line, and we called a sweep, and I came around the corner. I would have erased her I would have destroyed her. And for me to even say that now is controversial. Well, how can you say that? But it's biological reality. I mean, blows my mind. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, that specific example is interesting. So people are coming around to the idea now that maybe men should not be participating in women's sports, right? But I would also argue that women shouldn't be participating in men's sports either, for that very reason. You had no, it was not necessary for you to have to feel that when being a pulling guard, and you're going to smash her in the next week. That now, if that was another boy, I suspect you would have felt maybe slightly different. You might have still taken it easy, like if it was sort of a kid that was just really small, weak kid. You may have taken it easy, but you may have really crushed him, right? And it's different. And so I would actually advocate for women not participating in men's sports for these other types of reasons, but we don't talk about those reasons because we don't talk about the uniqueness of the male experience, like when you were pulling guard and we're going to put that girl in the next week.
I mean, you go to golf even, right? Men are going to out-hit women by 50, 60, 70 yards, most likely, right? At the high level. And that's okay, right? It doesn't mean, when you talk about that, and specifically the biological stuff, they always frame it as you're putting women down. No, we're just acknowledging there are inherent differences between men and women. And oh, by the way, there are things women are far better at than men. That's the beauty of the human species, is that we've evolved to complement each other. I've long argued that in general, very loosely, men's weaknesses are women's strengths, and women's weaknesses are men's strengths. And that's how we've gotten to where we're at. Yet having that discussion now, whether it's at the political level, the academic level, just in society in general, oh my, to me, it's insanity.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is this big push to sort of turn women into what men have historically been, and to sort of almost try to take away the uniqueness of what being a woman has meant for a long time. And I blame that on academia and the gender studies departments and women's studies departments and all the rubbish papers and books that they publish, trying to basically just push women into these historically male roles. And if they want to do that, that's fine. But I think it then kind of takes away from the particular unique contributions you're referring to that women have historically made.
Well, I mean, we've gotten to the point now where and I did a video on this earlier this week, we're now demonizing motherhood. They're actually convincing younger women that being a mother is a bad thing. It wrecks your body, it's exhausting, blah, 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 blah. And I sit there and go, that's why women were put on this earth, to have children, just like men were put on this earth to impregnate women. I mean, very simplistic mindset, I know, but fundamentally that is what it is. And yet now they're demonizing it and they want women to become men. And that's one of the things about feminism in general that just blows my mind is they so hate women, is the way I like to put it. They want to turn them into men, and that's not a good thing for anybody.
Yeah, and I'll say from the university perspective, I think that's kind of what's happening. It's just sort of this idea that you can replace sort of a male professor with a female professor, and you'll not only get all the good things the male professor brought, but you're going to get more. You're going to get the moral superiority of the female professor, in addition to all the things that the male professor. And we're learning, no, no, no. Men and women are different. They, on the average, bring different things to the table. You cannot just simply replace a male in a given position with a female and expect to get the same outcome and then some. No, no, no. You're going to get trade-offs.
And that translates into the family as well. Right? There's things that fathers teach their children, both boys and girls, that mothers cannot, and vice versa. And rather than celebrate that and understand that that's the best we can do for our children to ensure that both parents are involved in teaching, we've kind of said, no, we'll let all the moms do it. And, well, the data is showing, everything at every level, every bit of data is showing that's had a tremendously negative blowback on society. And yet we're still sticking to that paradigm like it's glue. Again, it just blows my mind. And I think academia drives a lot of that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Academia is driving I think, all the problems we're discussing today. Even shamefully, exercise science departments not being able to come out and explicitly state, physiological differences in performance between men and women. It's been an absolute embarrassment. But on the fatherhood side of things, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's been devastating. The rise of the sort of fatherless home and the lack of the male role model, and also just one thing I think we could do better at. And part of the problem is we don't really study it all that much, or at least the studies that are done do not get any coverage, is explaining to young males and then men what their unique contribution actually is. So the thing that the kid is more likely not to get from mother, but to get from father. And here is what your unique contribution is going to be as a father. And that's what makes you unique. And that's why you need to stick around and help that child, develop and flourish, because you provide these unique things. We don't really say that very much because we sort of just view men as sperm donors, I suppose, and they don't really offer much more after that. And superhero mom will just take care of the rest.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it has a dramatically negative effect on boys in general. And kind of use that as a segue to shift focus a little bit. It goes to, we're raising our boys to hate themselves, to be blunt, and I think that's having a direct effect on things like the suicide rate. I mean, you look at, feminists will always argue, well, women try to commit suicide more than men. Fair point. Data shows that, but they don't succeed. My opinion is they're trying to get a call for attention. Whereas when men, or more specifically teenage boys, do it, they're doing it to get it done, and that's why they succeed more. And I know you've covered this a lot, speaking about things like the high rates of male suicide, and not just in the U.S. or Australia where you are, but really worldwide. I mean, the numbers I'm seeing coming out of things like places like India, mind-boggling. And again, what you kind of keep circling back to the same thing. Why do you think that we've allowed it to get to that point, and why is there so little talk about it when the numbers are just outright terrifying?
I think, there's potential that we actually do, as humans, maybe have a psychological bias toward not recognizing male suffering and disadvantage. There is some psychological experiments being done that tend to show this, and you can come up with all sorts of examples from things you see in the media as well. So when you present participants in a research study with different scenarios that involve a male victim or a female victim of any kind, there's always more empathy for the female victim and less for the male. So we've got potentially some sort of biological or psychological bias there. But so even if you sort of have that, we now have the data, so we have the information, and we can change that, and we can start to have the conversations about it and what can be done to make all that better. But you'll notice that for the most part, when suicide gets talked about at like a governmental level, it's never a sex specific framing of it. Now, as you said, it is true that women do attempt suicide at equal rates or maybe even slightly higher, but men are much more likely to complete suicide. But there is justification for framing suicide as a sex-specific way, just as we do for other sorts of health issues. But it's this sort of bias that I think is you just have to imagine, what if the sexes were reversed and it were women that were 75% of completed suicides? The world would come to a standstill until that problem got resolved. But we don't do that when it's men.
Yeah, I mean, you look at education, right? In the 60s and early 70s, it was 60% male in college, 40% female. It's entirely swapped now, and there's no talk now about helping the boys. That translates into things like suicide or other mental health issues that men face. There's that inherent bias, as you're talking about. There's a block. And when I talk with politicians, it is obvious it's there. You talk to them about things like governmental programs, and they don't want to make them gendered unless it's to the benefit of women, right? So like I've had conversations with politicians about male suicide. Or no, we'll talk about suicide. Yeah, that's fine. That needs to be addressed. Or homelessness is another one, right? Oh, we'll talk about homelessness. I want to help that. Okay, well, let's talk about the fact that 4 out of 5 of the homeless are males. Oh, we can't talk about that. No, we just need to address homelessness. And it goes to what you're talking about, is that there's bias just permeates through everything. And I think it's creating issues for everyone. And we have our blinders on and don't want to take them off. And I honestly don't know why. I don't know how that benefits anybody. Hey fans, I just wanted to take a quick break from the show to remind you just how much we here at Men Need to Be Heard truly appreciate and value your support. And we'd like to ask you to do us a little favor. It won't cost you a dime, and it'll only take a few seconds out of your day. Could you take a moment to give us that like, give us that thumbs up on the video, and even share it with your friends? Doing so will help us to spread the word and continue to raise awareness on the issues that men and boys face in today's modern world. And we'd love to hear what you have to say on today's topic. So don't forget to comment down below and let us know how we're doing. Your input and feedback means the world to us, and it helps us to continue bringing great guests and even more content each and every week. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss an episode. It's the best way to stay up to date with all of our latest discussions, interviews, and deep dives into the issues men and boys face. It also helps the channel to grow so that we can continue to raise even more awareness on the issues. So hit that subscribe button and become part of the Men Need to Be Heard community. All right, that's it for now. Back to the show.
Yeah, I don't think it does, because it's another example of not recognizing or acknowledging what objective reality is. And when you do not acknowledge what objective reality is, it's always going to turn out bad, because that's what we operate in. We operate in objective reality. So if you're not going to acknowledge or recognize male suffering and disadvantage, well, then you're going to have certain issues among males. And then because we're all interconnected and we're a social species, that's going to come back and impact women, and it's going to impact kids and everything. So, yeah, we've I guess got to keep trying to convince people, keep showing them the graphs and the data. Sometimes, there's certain people that are less responsive to data and graphs, but they might be more responsive to like personal stories. So I think it's important to just keep in mind the different modalities that you can use to deliver information.
Well, that's, James, that's an interesting point, because I've long argued that data is great, but stories are what sell, and that's why I encourage men to share their stories. Understanding you're going to get blowback. I get blowback for talking about what I've gone through, right? They love to weaponize it against me. Understand that's going to happen. But the more of us that talk about it, honestly, I think it will affect the data, because, and I want to get your opinion on this, I think a lot of the research is so gynocentric, and I've long said that studies will determine whatever the person paying for the study wants it to determine. There's a bias there. And that's not to say every study's like that, but I've seen enough to know. I've read enough. And not allowing for what men are feeling and all that, and framing data research not based on those feelings or thoughts, but instead a predetermined outcome or something like that, circles back to it doesn't help anyone. And I think it skews the research, which ultimately skews the funding towards it. What are your thoughts on all that?
I completely agree, and I think this is an increasing problem right now in the men's space, in terms of, so one thing that I mentioned before is a lot of the good men, I think, are leaving and going elsewhere. So then you're left with a certain type of researcher. And when it comes to these kind of men's studies, or what appear to be men's studies, you realize that they're mostly coming out of gender studies or women's studies departments. What was the recent example? There was a Canadian researcher. I don't know if I would have shared this on social media, but essentially what he did was he invited men who were part of men's groups to be part of like a focus group and do interviews and stuff. And he was asking him questions about why they were part of the men's group and all that stuff. And this researcher took what those participants told them and just turned it on its head, and basically framed the whole paper as these men not recognizing their privilege and all that stuff. When the reality of it is that these are probably just regular Joes, part of a group looking for some degree of social connection, and guys trying to help each other understand what the heck's going on in their life. They see an advertisement to participate in a study, and they're like, okay, this seems like someone who may want to actually help us or understand us so that we're maybe not so misunderstood. And then this researcher did this. Like, I still cannot believe that. I think we're going to continue to see stuff like this also in the domestic violence space. There's a lot of researchers now getting into the whole Andrew Tate phenomenon and boys being toxic and in the manosphere. So you're going to see more papers come out on sort of the quote unquote manosphere and how it's terrible for boys. And so you are 100% right that this is an increasing problem.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about that. I don't know if you saw the Netflix show Adolescence. I did a whole video on it, and that's exactly what you're talking about, right? That's not science. That's a TV show, but it's actually being presented by science by many feminist groups. Well, this is This is a documentary. No, it's not. It's complete fiction, and but again, it's going to feed into let's get actual scientific study to confirm that bias that's in that show. And I often say to people, because people will come at me, well, this is what this study shows. Okay, that's one study. I can show you a dozen that say something opposite. Well, those don't count. Or the one that blows my mind is they'll say, well, because I'll often mention if I put a video up on a particular issue, like the male loneliness epidemic, which is a complete fraud as far as I'm concerned, the way they're framing it, right? Well, that's, science shows. And I'm like, your study that you're trying to reference to had a 700 participants in it. I've got literally tens of thousands of men commenting on my video every day saying the opposite. That is not something you should just casually disregard. Yes, it's not scientific, but really any social science survey, are any of them truly scientific? Because you can twist the ending by the way you frame the questions. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's right. So even if you got, then that's what this Canadian researcher did.
Right.
I was reading through some of the quotations that the participants gave him, and they were just normal things you might say, and then he just twisted it against them. So I think a lot of guys will probably kind of why. I mean, men are actually already less likely to participate in survey research than are women. That's been known for decades. And I suspect that once they get word of all these sorts of things that are happening, they're going to be even less likely to participate in those studies. And this kind of comes back to the whole issue of funding for men's health. It's kind of weird that we sort of have to like kind of speculate sometimes. Oh, where are men at with their thinking and what's going on and blah blah blah. I mean, survey studies are not all that difficult to do. I mean, you have like Pew polls and Gallup polls and stuff like that. It would not take all that much money to do a massive survey to find out where guys are thinking on a variety of issues, but there's no funding for it. No one wants to fund that because no one cares. And they're probably scared of what the men are going to say, and they're not going to know how to reframe it all.
That's exactly what I was kind of chuckling when you said it, because I'm like, yep, that's exactly what it is. They don't want to know because it's going to run counter to everything they've claimed for decades. And it's going to prove it's all lies. It's they cannot allow that, because it's for one, it's going to blow feminism right out of the water, because everything they've pushed is based on a false narrative, especially things like medical research and all that. And to your point on all that, let's kind of dive into that a little bit, because you've done a lot of research and published a lot of stuff on medical research and just how governments view, and when I say governments, I also include, by the way, the UN, because I know you recently did something on that, how they view men and their issues and manipulate things to kind of hide them. I'm trying to keep it very simple again. What are some, you've mentioned a couple things, but what are some of the more glaring examples along those lines where you've seen where governments have manipulated data, studies, and all that to force things over to the female side instead of the male?
Well, if we start at the UN, which is taxpayer funded, I mean, they have the branch called UN Women. There is no UN Men. But what makes it all even worse is that UN Women is a highly feminist organization that just pushes out propaganda all the time. So it makes it even worse. So they get hundreds of millions of dollars every year. They publish nonsensical reports every single week. If we go to the US, well, one thing that you have going on now is, so in the early 1990s, within the NIH, they established the Office for Research on Women's Health. Now that office was founded on a claim that was at the time sort of questionable, and then not too long after found to be untrue, which is that women were supposedly underrepresented in clinical trials as participants. So that's been demonstrated to be untrue, but they established that office, and ever since that office was created, I mean, we have the data from the NIH showing that women are about 55 to 60% of all participants in NIH-funded trials. So women are not underrepresented in research, broadly speaking. They're not underfunded because we have the NIH data on funding as well, and I've published all that in my Substack. So what they do is so firstly, sometimes they just out and out lie. They just make the false claim. But then sometimes they'll find sort of a niche area within kind of health research where women haven't been as frequent of participants as men. And then they'll like really, really focus on that. And then they'll broaden that out to be the bigger claim somehow. Yeah, the data don't support that. And the data that don't support it are from the NIH itself. So they continue to push this. Also, for that particular office, actually had Kamala Harris won the election, I'm pretty sure that this plan that was developed by the national academies would have probably gone into action, which is to make that a separate institute within the NIH, not just a office, but a separate institute. And then they were wanting to jack up the funding substantially more and get multiple directions of funding. And so that likely would have happened. I don't think that's going to go forward now, but these narratives have been going on for decades. The same thing they were saying in the 90s, they're saying today, and they never go back and look at the data.
Because the data would prove their argument wrong, basically. I mean, they know that. And so they have to create this falsehood. And, I remember you had done I think it was on Substack, well, your newsletter in general, talking about this particular topic. Right around the same time, I had done a video on it. It was kind of funny. I kind of went through and showed how they misrepresent a lot of things. And, my starting point was life expectancy. Roughly 100 years ago, they were pretty much equal. There were some differences, but essentially it was equal. Now, depending who you talk to or what data you look at, it's somewhere between 5 to 7, maybe 8 years difference. Yet the claim they make is that women are underrepresented in studies, underfunded, and all that. But yet that very baseline, which is life expectancy, which is a hard number. I mean, it is what it is. It's tough to manipulate that one. Belies everything they're saying, yet they just stick to it. Again, I keep going back to the same question. How does that benefit anyone?
So what they do with the life expectancy difference, so at least they are now acknowledging it. So that's a step in the right direction. So they will sometimes put that in articles that appear, in the Guardian or New York Times, but they quickly pivot to disability years, life lost, or quality of life.
Yep.
And or chronic conditions. So that's how they switch it. So on one hand, it's good that this is where I was saying the epidemiological data are too undeniable. So now they're having to come around to acknowledge the life expectancy difference, but they always do this. They always find a twist to continue on with the narrative they wanted to push forward anyways. And so right now, what that twist is sort of this focus on chronic conditions and, women live more years with arthritis and all this. And it's like, well, okay, but the guy that blew his brains out at 25 probably like to have lived long enough to experience arthritis. Mm-hmm. But you don't want to talk about that. So yeah, it's really, and I'm all for, like, I want both men and women to be healthy. And yeah, women have particular health issues, higher prevalence rate than men, absolutely. And like arthritis is one, chronic fatigue syndrome, eating disorders. So we have these differences, but why can we not also have the male side of the equation discussed and talked about? They don't want to do it.
Yeah, it's that zero sum game again, you know. And a parallel to what you're talking about, you see it with the domestic violence side, right? For 40, 50 years, it's been women are always the victim, men are always the perpetrator. The data is coming out, they can't refute it anymore. So now they're manipulating it. Yeah, but it's the level of violence. Abuse is abuse. Yes, we can acknowledge that women tend to fare worse than men when there's actual abuse, but that doesn't change the narrative that abuse is pretty much equal between the two. But again, they try to reframe it to the detriment of men and benefit of women, and I know you've done a lot of research on that matter. In fact, you've uncovered things I wasn't even aware of, especially in Australia. And can you kind of talk about that a little bit as far as the domestic violence side, some of the things that you've seen?
Well, I guess anytime you see this kind of reporting in whether it's in the US or particularly here in Australia, this is like sort of the feminist key issue talking point. It always comes back to domestic violence against the women, and women are fearful for their life and all this. So in Australia, they're going really, really hard and heavy on this right now. And it is impacting boys and men in the sense that the way that they want to go about addressing this issue is to go into the schools and quote unquote engage with boys. And so like the state of Victoria now has oh gosh, what is it called? It's sort of like an Office of Men's Behavior Change, and they have all these plans to go into the school with these different programs. So, but you never hear the male victimization side discussed at all, zero. So whereas with the example we were just talking about with life expectancy, so at least life expectancy, that difference is getting some attention. It gets a half a sentence in an article in The Guardian. But the male victimization for violence, I've never seen that given a half a sentence in any article. They are just not willing to talk about that. I've published at Substack some of the funding data on that. There's in the US, you've got within the Department of Justice, the Office of, what is it called? The Office of Violence Against Women. Mm-hmm. So they get many millions of dollars each year for programs designed to decrease violence against women. Australia, they don't have necessarily an office like that, but they have all sorts of items in their budget designed for those same types of programs. So it's the same story in both countries.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the funding, I mean, you look at, I call it VAWA, some people call it VAWA, Violence Against Women Act, which inherently is illegal just based on its name. Right? The government cannot gender specific a program, but yet here we are. Over the last 30 years, because it came out in 94, 95, so we're 30 years in, you're talking tens of billions of dollars to help female victims, which I have absolutely no problem with. Don't take one penny away. But can we at least match the funding for men? Or hell, give us 50%. You look in, I don't know about Australia, but in the United States, there are 2 shelters for men, dedicated to men, in the entire country. A country of 350 odd million people. There are well over 2,000 for women. I'm sure Australia is probably no different. And yet, I mean, this is a huge problem, but blinders are on. We can't discuss it. And if we do discuss it, we got to make sure we always put it towards the women. And again, I keep circling. I know I'm sorry, I'm broken record. We keep circling back to the same thing. It doesn't benefit anyone to do that.
Yeah, that's right. And that funding that comes from that office, part of that goes towards those shelters. I think so, anyways. Or maybe that is actually through a different department. I know that because I've gone through federal budgets to extract a lot of these data, and there's definitely, maybe that was actually through HHS, for years they had a line item in the budget called battered women's shelters. So it was for years it was a line item in the budget where they had funds designated for that. And so yeah, you're right. It just continues. And what is amazing to me about all the articles that come out and the conversation and the Guardian and all these places about women's health is underfunded and less funding. It's like, what planet are you living on? Every single government office, department they've got an office for women, they've got funding, and how they kind of get away with it is they don't actually tell you what the male equivalent is. Like, what's the funding for the office for violence against men? Oh, wait, there is no office. There is
Right.
no funding. And they do that with the NIH's Office for Research on Women's Health. They simply just don't tell you that there is no office for research on men's health, yet they continue to want to get more and more money and make it into a new institute and all the rest.
Yeah, I mean, there's literally, at least in the U.S., dozens of offices for women at all different levels. I don't know of a single one for men, not one, that at any substantial level, or really any level. And again, when you have that dynamic, every bit of data they release is going to be skewed because, for example, on domestic violence, they're relying on what the domestic violence shelters are reporting to them. And I've, having run a domestic violence group for male victims and been part of that dynamic, I've literally watched them take intake reports from men and throw them in the trash. They don't show up in the reporting, which skews the numbers. Yet even knowing that, even now they're admitting 40% of domestic violence, the men are the victim, 40% of the time. So even though they're trying to hide it, it's so overwhelming they can't, which is now it goes to the level of it. And we're seeing that across everything, medical research and all of that. James, because we're starting to run out of time, how do we fix this? I mean, I mean, you do what you do, I do what I do, and I absolutely think that's the significant thing that we need to be doing is getting more to do that. But how else can we go about fixing this?
Well, yeah, I think we do need to keep doing what we're doing, and just getting the word out. I think, there's a lot of people out there, I think, that should give a go at running for different offices. We don't talk about that very much, about people stepping up to run for offices. But if we're frustrated with the people that, sit in various offices, why not give it a go? I mean, even if you lose, you still get your talking points out there, maybe a little bit more than you otherwise would. Because right now we're learning that we can't really rely on a lot of the people that are there. Another thing, kind of just tying it into politics and sex differences a little bit, is men do not vote. Fewer men than women vote every year, and this is consistent even in Australia, which has compulsory voting, so you have to vote or you get fined.
I didn't know that. Really?
Yeah, yeah.
I
It's
did not know.
one of only a couple of countries, I think,
I
and
like
so
that.
it's not a very big fine, but yeah, I was just actually looking at the data because we had a federal election here a couple weeks ago. And each year in Australia, you have to remember, Australia, much smaller population than the US, but about 400,000 fewer men than women vote every single year. And they just, I guess, take the fine. And then, of course, in the US, every year, substantially fewer men than women vote. So men also need to do the research on people who are going to be the people making these decisions about these, all these offices and funding for programs we're talking about. I guess, yeah, some men need to try to get a little bit more politically engaged. I mean, I know they feel disenfranchised. Either that, or run for office yourself and try to have a go.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I'm chuckling,
we're up
James.
against it. There's a lot of layers to this. We just got to keep pushing.
I'm chuckling because you're mentioning running for office. I've been asked to run for office so many times, like I've long lost count, and I've always turned it down. And the reason is because I know what's going to happen. One, I'll never get any funding from the parties, right? So in the U.S., it's a two-party system. I think Australia's more than two parties. I'm not sure. But they will not fund me because I have friends who are very high up in, say, the Republican Party. And I have friends on the Democratic side, too. Because I would prefer as an independent. I'm kind of in the middle. They're not going to fund us, and I know what would happen if I run. Let's say I ran for mayor, just to pick a thing. They will use what I've done, which is advocating on behalf of men and boys, to demonize me. And yeah, I could try and get my talking points out, but they're not going to be heard in the sense that they need to. So that's part of the problem. Now, I'm not saying that I disagree with you. Men do need to run. What we need to do is step up and support the men that run and talk about that and make sure that they're heard, because to your point, men do vote less than women do, generally speaking, across every age group, from 18 to 25 all the way up to the boomer level. Yet the reality is men decided the last election in the U.S., not just at the presidential level, but through the various state houses, Senate, Congress in general. Men decided that, and they didn't vote at the level that women did. If we actually started voting as a group, we could change things. I agree with you. I think that's a significant thing that we need to get men to be doing.
Yeah, and I have a Substack post specifically about that. It's called "Why Do Fewer Men Than Women Vote?" And I go through the various reasons, and some of it ties back to even the life expectancy difference, and some of it ties back to things like more men than women are in prison. And a lot of times when you're in prison, I think it's state dependent, but depending on your charge, you're not allowed to vote. And so what you end up getting is this sort of cycle where, when you're not fostering kind of boys and men, and let's say because of that, let's say a kid grows up in a fatherless home, he gets into a lot of trouble, drugs and crime, he's in a prison, and so he never gets politically engaged, he never gets to vote and stuff. So these things end up having like these cyclical effects. So that's kind of an issue that's, because I now have seen it in Australia as well, it's something that I'm kind of intrigued by, and there might be room to push forward with a story there about, you finding ways to get men more politically engaged and voting for the people they think will represent them. I will say just quickly, in Australia, we had a federal election a few weeks back, and the left-leaning party here, which is called the Labor Party, or the equivalent of the U.S. Democrats, they won. And part of the problem for the party on the right was that they did not have a backbone. And so they did not just stand up tall for what they believed in. And I'm kind of just relating this back to all the boys and men stuff. I think when you go out there and you start talking about certain issues, people come at you. But have a backbone and stand tall if you know that what you're saying is right. Because in Australia, it didn't help them to cave on certain policy issues. It counteracted, and people just decided they didn't want to vote for that party. So
I think that's what you're going to see with the Republican Party in the next 2 years, in 26, is you're going to see a backlash against them, especially from men, because they're not showing the backbone that they need to support men. Men put them in office based on, we want you to fix some of the things that we're worried about, and yet they're not doing it. We could do a whole show on just that, believe me. But yeah, it speaks to what we need to do, is get up and hold these guys accountable. So James, we do have to wrap things up. There's a question I like to ask most of my guests, if not all of them, and I tweak it a little bit, but for you, the question is, if you could snap your fingers and change one thing about the world overnight, what would it be?
Ooh.
It can be anything.
Look, I'll just say the gender bias that we've been talking about today. It's what underlies almost all of the issues that we've talked about today. is this bias against men.
Amen to that. All right. I want to make sure people can follow you because, as I said, I have for some time now, and you have so much valuable information. Where can people follow you? And is there a particular place you prefer over others?
Yeah, so I'm active on X, and my handle is my name, so James L. Nuzzo. And I'm also active on Substack, and my newsletter is called The Nuzzo Letter.
Amen to that. By the way, I get it. I think it's pretty much every day you send something out or close to it. It seems like it anyway. And I will put links down in the show notes, so make it very easy for people to go and find them. Any final thought that you want to share with the audience?
No, just thanks so much for having me on, and yeah, I hope people can find my graphs and my stories, and just keep sharing them, and we'll make some change. We'll get there.
And again, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come on the show and share some of those thoughts, and highly encourage people to follow you because there's just a plethora of information that you provide. You do the work that makes my life easier, as I said at the beginning of the show. So personally, I want to thank you for what you do, and want you to know that it is making a difference for me and everyone. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. Awesome show. Thank you so much for James for joining us. And again, what we talk about here is the issues that men and boys face from a wide spectrum. And to James's point, the gender bias against men is, I kind of agree with him, the biggest issue that we're facing worldwide. And it is worldwide. We tend to focus on our individual countries, whether it be the US or Australia, the UK, and so forth. But really, when you step back and look at it, it's a worldwide issue. And the way that we can combat it more than anything else is by speaking up and sharing our stories. Go and follow James on Substack. Get his newsletter. Use that information, but put your story with it. Talk to politicians. Talk to the media. The more of us that speak up, the more of us that are going to be heard in the long run. And that's ultimately how we do bring about change. All right, we're going to wrap it up on that note. Don't forget to give me that thumbs up. Give me that like. It helps to get the algorithm to show this to more people. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. New videos come out daily from me. The podcast comes out weekly. And we'll just close it with that and see you next time on Men Need to Be Heard.